Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is our January 2025 editorial webinar on sources. The LEMDO webinar series is funded by a connection grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. I'm Janelle Jenstad. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a professor of English at the University of Victoria. I'm the conceptor and director of LEMDO and co-coordinating editor of DRE, MOMS, and the NISE anthologies. We like to begin in a good way by acknowledging the territories that we are living and working on. We acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Esquimalt peoples on whose territory the university stands, and the Lekwungen and Wet'suwet'en peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Our plan for today is for me to give a brief overview of how LEMDO handles sources. And then we have two guest speakers. Brett Greatley-Hirsch is going to talk to us about using sources at various stages of the editorial process, including a forthcoming resource called BEAD. And then Kate McPherson is going to talk to us about the Early Modern English Encyclopedia that she co-edits. So at any point, feel free to ask questions, either by putting them in the chat or by raising your hand. And we'll have a few minutes at the end to take questions if you prefer to gather them up and ask them at the end. So let me introduce our speakers. I know that Brett has his own introductory slide, which I just saw this morning, but I will express my appreciation to Brett for being here today. Brett is a professor of Renaissance literature and textual studies, founder and co-coordinating editor of Digital Renaissance Editions and co-coordinating editor of the New Internet Shakespeare Editions. I should also give a tip of the hat to Brett because LEMDO probably wouldn't exist without him or without a very fun brainstorming session in the grad club at the University of Victoria where we used about 50 napkins and mapped out what LEMDO would be, and we came up with the acronym at that point. You probably know Brett best for his absolutely fantastic lino-cut postcards and t-shirts, which are a hot commodity in the field of early modern studies. And Catherine McPherson is at Utah Valley University, where she's a professor of English and literature. She's the co-editor of the Encyclopedia of Early Modern England Encyclopedia, sorry. She's also the editor of Pericles and the Comedy of Errors for the New Oxford Shakespeare, the editor of multiple essay collections, often with her longtime collaborator, Kate Moncrief. And she's also an award-winning teacher, which makes it especially valuable to us that she's doing such great work with EMEE. So let me talk a little bit about LEMDO's site-wide bibliographies. We have one site-wide bibliography up and running already. We call it Bibl1, which is after its name in our file system, BIBL1, and BEAD1, which is forthcoming, and Brett will say a bit more about that. So the principle behind site-wide resources is that we store canonical data in one place, and then when we need it, we call upon that single canonical source. So, we know that with a project like this one, people are going to be citing the same sources across multiple editions. It doesn't make sense to us to have people citing all of these identical sources in their own editions, likely in different kinds of ways, which is potentially confusing. And as LEMDO grows, the site-wide bibliography will in effect become a bibliography of early modern drama. Also, if we notice a mistake in the data, we'll correct it in that one canonical place, and that correction will proliferate across all the editions and anthologies that cite that particular source. In terms of where they live, this is a screenshot of the repository where we keep all of our information, and you'll notice that BEAD1 and Bibl1 have a little placeholder there. Brett, we will change the name of BEAD1 to BEEED1. It's just too confusing to have two different acronyms for BEAD. So we use Bibble1 as a site-wide bibliography for primary and secondary sources, except editions. And that's where BEAD is going to come in. BEAD is going to be a bibliography of editions. So we're going to make that single bifurcation in the way that we handle sources at LEMDO. So your edition bibliography is probably your entry point into LEMDO's sources. Every edition will have a bibliography. This is the landing page for A Humorous Day's Mirth in its new dress, forthcoming. So if we looked at that bibliography, we would see plenty of items listed. Here's an example of a secondary source. So one of the things that you'll notice here is that we include World Shakespeare Bibliography numbers for anything that happens to be in the World Shakespeare Bibliography. Most Shakespeare criticism will be in the WSB. A lot of criticism that doesn't glancingly look at Shakespeare is not going to be in this resource. But we made a deal with the World Shakespeare Bibliography that they would construct their URLs in a particular way so that if people have a subscription to WSB and they click on that link on the WSB number, it will actually take them right to the page in the World Shakespeare Bibliography. Okay. Now, the editor did not type this into their bibliography. What they actually did was they included the what's called an XML ID, an identifier for this item from Bibble, and then it gets vacuumed up from Bibble and included in this edition. Here are some primary sources. Again, same thing. These sources are actually recorded in the Bibble1 file, and then they get pulled into this bibliography. Next week, Navarra is going to teach you how to set up the bibliography so that it pulls in this information. So I've pulled up two examples of primary sources. You'll notice that in both cases, we include the STC number. We also include the ESTC number and a link, which is currently broken while the British Library tries to rebuild this resource. We will, if they're not able to rebuild that resource relatively soon, we'll probably repoint all of these at the resource that the Early Print Probability Project has mounted using data from 2014 so that we have something that we can point to. Some things like dictionaries are also in the lexicons of Early Modern English. And so where possible, we point people to that dictionary in LEMEE. LEMEE is also a digital resource and potentially fragile in the same way that all the British Library resources are. So we make these links, but we also know that there may come a time where we just have to take them away. Okay, the Anthology Bibliography also pulls data in from Bibble1. The Anthology Bibliography is essentially all of the edition bibliographies that are in that anthology, plus anything cited in the anthology about pages. And they can be curated into lists fairly easily. So here's an example of the Queen's Men edition bibliography. Okay, and they have chosen to start their bibliography with a paragraph introducing the bibliography and explaining what's on it. This bibliography lists all the sources cited in the QME editions published to date, except for specific copies of early publications, which are listed only in the edition bibliographies. And that's actually a LEMDO-wide policy. We don't put specific copies in Bibble1. If somebody wants to cite a specific copy of an early publication in their edition, they can. We have a mechanism for people to be able to add things to their own bibliographies that are not in Bibble1. Generally, we want things to be in Bibble1, but there are a few cases where it's just so incredibly niche, specific to that edition, that we wouldn't put it in Bibble1. And then they've chosen to break things down even further, works cited in QME about pages. Okay, just a quick note on citation style. Our citation style is modified MLA. It's based on MLA 7, and we'll probably stay at MLA 7. We can't afford to keep changing our citation style every time the MLA gets a new idea. And so you can see that we've got parenthetical references. They consist of the last name and then a page number. So we've got Myola 13 here, and we've got Wiggins 64, 65. And we can cite other things too. We can actually cite from the play that we're talking about and make a direct link to it. And we can also have footnotes as well. So I'm going to toggle over to my Digital Renaissance Editions beta screen and just show you quickly all of these things in action. So here's a bibliography for Humor Stays Mirth, and you can see that it's been curated here, copies of the quarto, subsequent editions, other works. To the general introduction. So here's the paragraph that I had on the screen before. If you click on Myola 13, you actually get the full reference, which is being pulled in from Bibble 1. There's Wiggins. We click on the scene and speech number, we'll go directly to the place in the play. And finally, we can have an editorial footnote. MLA, of course, allows footnotes. So for longer references or for points where you want to provide a state-of-the-art footnote, you can do so. In those state-of-the-art footnotes, you can cite sources. So if you click on that, you'll get a different pop-up window, which is the source. Okay. All right, so I've shown you that live. A few resources. All of chapter 10 of the LEMDO encoding guidelines is about bibliography and citation guidelines. So you can browse that at your leisure or as your need dictates and find answers to many, many, many more questions. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Brett now.
Great, thank you, Janelle. Can we load my slides, or am I going to do that myself?
I can pull them up. Just give me one moment.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, well, here we go. We don't need this. We've covered who I am and what I do already, which is great. I'm going to speak briefly about editorial sources. And what do I mean by that? Editorial sources are those materials which are essential for you to establish your text, part of the way that you conceive of a theory of your text and textual transmission. Primarily, this is through processes of collation and the critical bibliographical analysis of textual variants as they appear between early print and manuscript witnesses. So oh, can I click? No, I can't. Can I take control of this? No, I'm just going to have to ask Navarra to kindly click through.
Yes, I will. There we go.
So here, for example, is a very simple, well, here's quite a straightforward but strikingly visual example from Thomas Dekker and Thomas Middleton's play, The Honest Whore, or if you're reading the second quarto, The Converted Courtesan. And I've given the credits for that. The other way that you would be using editorial sources for establishing your text is by considering of conjectural emendations that are made to the text by previous editors. If I get you to click through twice more. So here, for example, we have a section of the same plays from the 1604 first quarter. The doctor here says that, and through an icy rust, which Alexander Dice, when he's putting together his works of Thomas Middleton in 1840, thinks, well, maybe icy crust makes better sense. He doesn't incorporate that himself in his edition of the play, but he throws it up as a conjectural emendation, which is finally approved and endorsed by Fretz and Bowers in his edition for the dramatic works of Thomas Dekker, more than 100 years later. But that's an example of the sorts of conjectural emendations that are made and sometimes adopted by the editorial tradition. Editorial sources are also useful for preparing your commentary by considering what previous editors have chosen to discuss and/or gloss, and how they have done so. Now, this, of course, has important critical consequences, and I would direct those of you who are interested in following this up to read Laurie Maguire's excellent feminist editing in the body of the text, and similar chapters raising similar issues by Brandy K. Adams in relation to race, Jeffrey Maston in relation to sexuality, and Sarah Neville more broadly about the affordances of the digital medium and what we can expect of editors and users of electronic editions in relation to editorial commentary. Can get you to click the next one. Perfect. So here's an example. This is from Paul Mulholland's edition of what he's decided to call The Patient Man and the Honest Whore. What he means is the Honest Whore Part 1. This is for the Oxford Collected Works of Thomas Middleton from 2017. Here we have the titular Honest Whore. Bellafront asks, "Where's my rough and poker, you blockhead?" Roger, whose name also bears some explication here, says, "Your rough and your poker are engendering together upon the cupboard of the court," or the court cupboard. Now, if we look at the terms that are glossed in this edition, we're just told that poker is a poking stick, a small steel rod which was heated and used for setting the pleats of rough, and then some discussion of a court cupboard being a sort of movable sideboard. Now, if I get you to click again, thanks, Navarra. When he edited the plays for Digital Renaissance editions, Joost Daalder gave us a much more comprehensive discussion of what was meant by rough and poker. And Joost's interest, one of Joost's abiding interests in this play was its fascination with bawdy, perhaps not surprising given that we're dealing with a series of plays called The Honest Whore. And of course, part of his annotation of this talks about rough being a fashionable collar and a hot poker used to stiffen the fluted pleats whilst moist with starch water in a process which suggested copulation, hence potential bawdy on vagina and penis respectively. But he also talks, as you can see from the icon next to the texts, he's also offered similar annotations for engendering, which of course has bawdy and sexual connotations, and court cupboard as well. So I'll get you to click on the next one. So if you're interested in doing this sort of thing, and this is the sort of bread and butter of your editorial labor, I'm going to just admit, then how do you get started? Where do you locate these resources? Now, for lists of early print and manuscript witnesses, you can consult subject catalogs and reference works. We've already talked about the STC and the ESTC numbers, which we include in the Bibble file. And Janelle's already talked about the Print and Probability Project, which has very kindly hosted the STC data from 2014, while the British Museum still struggles to get back up and running. But other subject catalogues, which also include lists of early print and manuscript witnesses, include the Wiggins and Richardson British Drama Catalogue, Darrell Grantley's English Dramatic Interludes, and Farmer and Lesser's deep database of early English playbooks, which was only just recently last year relaunched in its revised 2024 edition. The examples that I'm giving here are all from drama, but of course, LEMDO and Digital Renaissance editions are not drama exclusive. The other source where you might turn to find lists of early printed manuscript witnesses are standard editions of the texts that you were looking at, where these exist. I'll get you to click on the next one. Now, for lists of scholarly editions, you can also consult specialist library catalogs, subject references, and bibliographies. So, for example, the Folger or the Huntington libraries tend to have fairly well-stocked shelves of the kind of editions that we would want to work with. The Wiggins and Richardson catalog does include lists of scholarly editions, and some of them will also, especially if you're working with Shakespeare or Shakespearean material, will be in the World Shakespeare Bibliography online. But you should be aware that coverage in these sorts of resources will be partial, potentially dated, and or both. The other source for finding lists of scholarly editions for you to collate and consult will be specialist databases, and Janelle's already flagged this, but this is where my own current project comes in, BEED, the Bibliography of Editions of Early English Drama, which will be a comprehensive catalogue of editions of early drama that have been produced from the year 1700 through to the present, and importantly, it will include unpublished editions. So it will include things like doctoral and MA theses, which may include some valuable information that has otherwise been lost and marginalized. And BEED should be launched, fingers crossed, late 2026 or early 2027. And BEED will be linked directly and embedded in fact, built in LEMDO. And that was the makeshift logo for BEED there, which we were just looking at. Yeah, there we go. I like bees. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So you've got your lists. You actually want to get hold of these items to look at, other than if you're fortunate enough to live a stone's throw from Oxford or the Folger or the Huntington, and you're able to consult these materials in situ, early printed manuscript witnesses or scholarly editions of the same works are increasingly available in digital formats, and they're available from specialist full-text databases, including EBO or Early English Books Online. But if you're looking at the longer editorial tradition, this will also include databases like 18th century collections online or 19th century collections online. Institutional repositories for individual institutions, including the Huntington and the Folger, are also important resources in this regard. But also don't discount the larger scale digitization projects, especially when we're thinking about editions that are out of copyright. And some examples of those include Google Books, the Internet Archive, HathiTrust, and Europeana, which might be new to some of the North American colleagues. But if, for example, it's been digitized by the Bodleian libraries, it will inevitably show up in Europeana, which is an aggregated search of European library holdings. And I think that's maybe it for my slides. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Brett.
I'm up next. Yeah. Yeah. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Kate McPherson, as Janelle said, and I am going to speak with you about, okay, now I have to navigate. I'm not super used to doing this, so let me.
I can also share my screen for you if you'd like, Kate.
I think I want to do it myself. I just have to thrash around helplessly for just a minute. There we go. I think. Clicking share. There we go. Yeah, we're good now. So I'm going to talk with you about the EMEE project, which I have been working on for an absolutely ridiculously long time. I got recruited by Janelle after having worked with her on some Moemel stuff back in 2015. And so she asked me to essentially fully revise the Shakespeare's Life and Times. And I felt like this was too large a project to do on my own. And so I recruited my work wife, Kate Moncrief, to help me with the project. And we are getting close after a decade of work on this with some hiatuses in there. So let me take you through some of it. So EMEE, the Early Modern England Encyclopedia, is going to be a LEMDO hosted, peer-reviewed set of articles on early modern England, with a focus on the social and historical and literary context. So for instance, when Brett was speaking just now about the notes from the Honest Whore about ruffs, well, guess what? We have a piece on ruffs. So that is one exciting sort of thing that editors can think about, is instead of necessarily having to delineate many things about a specialized topic, they're going to be able to turn to EMEE and link to one of our pieces, and then just be able to make their own more particular notes about it, for instance, about the sexual connotations of these rough making tools that Brett was speaking about. If you're not really familiar with it, the very first Internet Shakespeare editions included a very large section called Shakespeare's Life and Times, which was created by Dr. Michael Best with the assistance of his students. And our revised edition is going to be fully available, as I said, for you to be able to link in your own editions of Shakespeare and other authors for digital Renaissance editions and anything else there. So this old resource began its life way back in the day as a CD-ROM, and it is still online, but it's operating very minimally. It was designed as a web page in which you turned pages like a book with an arrow at the bottom of the page. The content, the references, the illustrations, the navigation, and the style of it needed complete redesign. And so that's what we've been working on for the last decade. That's horrible to say, but there it is. There's a static site now that people can still use, but many of the features are unavailable on it because of its static nature. So for instance, if you haven't ever looked at this resource, I thought I would take people through what it looks like. So here is a screenshot of a page from the Life and Times about Elizabeth I's education. And you see there that it gives a very basic intro. It has some interlinking on it. It has an illustration. It has some references for people to follow up on, some quotations from primary sources, that sort of thing. The thing about it is that it has a pretty good image. It has this useful primary text quotation, but it's really too short for current web reading habits. People, even undergraduates or high school students, want more information than this provides. There are terms that you see here where there is a link with an asterisk, and those no longer function the way that Michael Best designed them to in some browsers. And at the bottom of it, although I don't think captured in this screenshot, there's a thing that says further reading, but when you click on it, it leads the reader to a list of 37 scholarly books, the newest of which was published in 1995. So that's how we can know that, you know, it's no longer going to be working there. Okay. For some reason, I've lost my navigation ability on my slideshow. Why could that be? I'll try this button. No? Okay. Does anybody have any suggestions? Ah, there we go. All right, it worked then. I don't know why. So the Life and Times was quite popular. It still is used by readers across the internet, and at its height, it was getting a large number of hits on the monthly basis. We are hoping that you as editors and scholars will be able to link to the EMEE site in your editions. once we have them up, which is soon. The materials are written and being rewritten for the advanced secondary and college university level student, and also their instructors. So they're written for high school students and undergraduates rather than scholars. So the best news is that we think we're going to be ready to launch a sizable chunk of articles on EMEE later this year. So we're really quite excited about that. I, like Michael Best, have been working extensively with students to write and rewrite these articles. All of those students will receive extensive credit, of course, for the work that they've done. We have about 200 pieces encoded right now, including complete sections on Shakespeare's biography and his history as a writer. So, for instance, entries on his early life, his education, his marriage, his will, but also on sonnets, some sections on chronologies of sections of plays, you know, early plays, mid plays, late plays, that sort of thing. All of those will be up later this year. We have another 50 or so articles undergoing editing at the present time. And what's great about EMEE, and then of course any digital resources, it's ultimately expandable. And so we have space for articles on any relevant early modern topic that you could contribute or that you could work with your students to contribute. So eventually we aim to have something that looks a great deal like MOEML, a site whose functionality and appearance I admire a great deal. The work I got involved with Janelle early on the Curtain Theater was something that my students wrote. And so here's a screenshot of what that looks like. And this is the kind of credit that students will receive and will mimic this on the EMEE site. We, based on this MOEML model, implemented very early on an extensive pedagogical partnership component in EMEE. I've worked with professors at universities in the state of Utah, so at Brigham Young University, at Weber State University. I've also worked really extensively with Melissa Walter at the University of Fraser Valley, and she has worked with me for a number of semesters, and her students have written more than 125 pieces for EMEE, and she just sent me a note yesterday that's saying she has a pile more. And so I've created a new online folder. And so I'll be at work editing those, corresponding with those students if to let them approve or offer additional revisions to suggested edits that I make. So I engage in a dialogue with these undergraduate authors and get them involved in a true professional writing project on this. So these students become content revisers and creators. Sometimes, for instance, Melissa would be teaching a play or having a topic in a course where there was nothing on EMEE for the student to revise, but the student themselves was interested in a topic like tobacco or roughs, for instance. And so the Melissa and the student would work together to suggest a topic to me and say, is this suitable? And almost always I say, yes, that sounds fantastic. The student does a great deal of work to choose appropriate images that have Creative Commons permissions for us to reuse them on the website. And then one of the main features that we have at the end of every EMEE article is a bibliography that appears on the screen initially at the bottom of the article that says key print sources and key online sources. And I'll be showing you some screenshots in just a moment here. So these articles, for the most part, we ask students to create in the 500 to 1,000 word range. We require that they contribute at least one, but no more than 3 images to include in their piece. And that they include these key print and key online sources that they think will be useful to students as they, for instance, went deeper into this topic. As I said, we work extensively with the authors to review their work, to perhaps update some of the language, make editorial suggestions along the way. And so in this pedagogical partnership, students can be asked to choose and revise these articles as part of a major writing assignment in any upper division course in a humanities discipline. So in literature history, art history, history of science, all those kinds of things would definitely work. We have an ambitious goal to get the students' work editorially reviewed and returned to them within half a year, a faster pace than many academic journals manage. And that, as I said, we're hoping to get the site up, we think probably in October or November of this year. One of the things that I always tell students as I'm corresponding with them as an editor is that once I accept their piece, that they, of course, can list it on their CV as, awaiting cite publication and with a date. And this is important to students as they build their resumes. So the other thing that I do as part of this pedagogical partnership is that I have a whole step-by-step process handout, an assignment for students with linked materials, many of which were adapted from the materials that Janelle and others developed for MOEML. I have a rubric for instructors to assess the finished articles as assignments in the class that then I also reference partially as an editor working on that. I have a set of guidelines if instructors wish to assign these to groups. I have done it as group assignment and in an individual assignment, and I can give people counsel and advice about the way that those things work. And I also have a version of this slideshow that can be included, for instance, on your learning management system to introduce this project to students or that you can use in class for students. So for me, I think I really like to focus on the learning objectives for students in this, in that they become more expert in the field. They get to actually contribute to a major resource. They become better writers and researchers, and they hopefully gain confidence as scholars, and they gain skills that they can talk about in collaborating with editors or other students. And so I have a whole flow chart for students to include. For instance, if you were teaching an online class, right, you can include this in your online class. And so we're very excited about EMEE as a resource. And I think that it is going to be essential for LEMDO editors to make use of it. I can only encourage you, like, once it's up, or if, as you are working now, if you want to query me about how the site is going to work and what you want to see from it. I didn't know if you wanted me to show any of the site, the Jenkins site of it right now. Should I show some of that, Janelle? Would that be good?
Sorry?
Should I show some of the unpublished EMEE stuff that's up right now?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So while you're navigating there,
yeah,
we're really hoping that editors will point users to EMEE entries. So rather than having 12 editors annotate rough, point to the EMEE resource, which will have the most recent criticism that addresses roughs.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping. Okay. Let me
kind of like a collective annotation pool that we can all tap into.
We have a hand up right now.
Yes. What is your question?
Hi, everybody. My question is there, okay, here I'm seeing an A to Z listing. I was just going to ask what topics have been covered. Is there a place that we can reference if we are in the process of designing a new Shakespeare class at the moment and may be able to incorporate something like this for the spring?
Yeah, for the spring, I don't know if I'm supposed to point people to this yet. Janelle, what is your counsel about that?
You can share a link to your beta site with someone like Kristen, who's inside the LEMDO world. We don't ever want to share these Jenkins links on social media.
Right. Yeah, I knew there were limitations, but I wasn't sure what the restrictions were, so I wanted to respect that. So yeah, here's the A to Z listing of what's up and about right now. And yes, I can share this with you, Kristen, and I mean, we can capture it. I mean, people can see it on the YouTube link at the top of this page right now. The best way to use it right now is the A to Z listing. The topics that you see across the top of the screen right now, articles haven't been necessarily accurately included under these yet, but they're all in the A to Z right now. So, so you can see, I'll scroll just a moment for you that you can see the huge number of things we have available. There's falconry. There's lots of stuff on women writers and women's lives, one of my particular interests in the period. I worked on those early on and had a student work on those as a research intern. Here's all the stuff on the Shakespeare itself that people can link to. There's some work on particular plays like The Tempest or The Taming of the Shrew or Hamlet. And then there's all kinds of interesting things about, for instance, the city of Venice or, other writers, allied writers like Sir Thomas Wyatt, that kind of thing. And so there's many, many, many ways for people to include these materials in their courses. Here, for instance, is one that has the image included on it that I wanted to show you. And so you can get a sense of, how much more extensive these articles are than the ones on the Life and Times. And here you get a brief view of the choice we made to point immediately on the screen to sources, which we think is very useful especially for younger scholars, rather than them having to distinguish from a large bibliography what are really important sources. So we're just going to recommend some right up front to them. So I think that's about all I had. So I will stop sharing my screen and turn the time back over to the people at UVic.
Well, it looks like we have about 15 minutes for questions if anybody has them. So we'll stick around, and if people have questions, please either speak up or put it in the chat.
I have another kind of selfish question. I haven't done encyclopedia entries with students for some time because the quality of their work was not where I needed it to be, and getting it there. And I've done this with the Kit Marlowe project.
Yes.
And I have abandoned the practice.
Okay.
But if I do revivify the practice, and right now I'm just having a moment of weird burst of energy that I don't know if it's sustainable. Would it be okay to double publish such entries on the Kit Marlowe project, which someday will probably land under a LEMDO umbrella in the future? But for now, just to give students, would that be okay?
I don't have any reservations about that. I would defer to my supervising editor, Janelle, to make ultimate decisions about that, but I don't have any problem about cross-posting.
And we'd be happy to say, please also, once it's published, please go to and kind of use that as a pointer to EMEE too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that, Melissa Walter has had some concerns, along the way, and she sends me pieces she thinks are acceptable. And then she'll send me another folder of things that were like, students did this as an assignment, but it's pretty sketch. So why don't you take a look at it and see, do you want to work with this student or not? Or do you want to just send them a rejection right away and just say, thank you very much for your interest in contributing. At the present time, your article is not in a state where we can edit it for consideration, And so sometimes on those, I think the topic is promising enough and the piece has glimmers that are strong enough in it that I will work pretty extensively on it as an editor and correspond with the student and say, look, let's be co-authors on this. And I have the students as the first author and myself as the second author, because I don't actually need more publications. Students need publications. But if I do a lot of work and rewriting and adding of whole sections or paragraphs or that kind of thing, I do want, obviously to honestly acknowledge that this was not all done by the student author. So yeah, that's been my solution for how to deal with those weaker entries from students?
One of the other things I've done with the weaker entries from students is reassigning them to future students.
Oh, yeah.
And having them kind of pick up where they left off. And that way it sort of keeps things in circulation and takes a little bit of the pressure off of me until it gets to a place where I feel like I have the energy to go in and edit with them.
Yeah. And I will tell you, the students of Melissa's who've worked on Marlowe-related topics are definitely using Kit Marlowe Project as a citation. So just saying.
Thank you. I just won some money to overhaul it and make it more navigable and keep an eye on the endings, thanks to my education from Janelle and UVic and the endings project. So that's happening this spring also. So it's a busy spring. But
great. That's great. Well, thanks for those questions and
thank you. And yeah, of course,
your wisdom about what to do about those weaker pieces. That's an interesting suggestion. I'll talk about that with Melissa. She and I have a meeting scheduled.
Any other questions for Brad or Kate? Okay, why don't we wrap up a bit early and everyone can get on with our days. Just before we wrap up, I'm going to share my slide deck again. Just to remind you that our next webinar is actually 1 week from today, next Thursday, and Navarra is going to be explaining what happens under the hood, how you actually make those links in your edition from your bibliography to the Bibble 1 site-wide bibliography, and how you make links from your inline citations to the bibliography. And we would be remiss if we did not thank the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for funding this webinar series. Thank you to Navarra Holden for designing the slides that I used in my deck. Martin Holmes, as always, for the TEI customization that makes LEMDO work, and HCMC for site design and hosting.